Chapter 874. Qin Family. After the family banquet, Qin Xiang looked at his eldest son and said, "The reform mentioned this morning is related to agriculture. If you are not careful, it will shake the foundation of the country. You must be very careful with every step you take. You must not be careless." Qin Yan immediately nodded. "Father, don't worry. I will be extra careful. However, since it is a reform, you don't need to be too conservative." "Don't be too careful," Qin Yan respectfully said. "I understand." After the conversation, Qin Xiang stood up and walked out of the room. Halfway through, he realized that he had left a dossier he had read before the meal on the chair. He turned back, and when he stepped through the door again, he was slightly startled. There was only one person left in the hall. That person was a bit thin. He stood up from the corner of the banquet table and placed the leftovers in front of him. Before he sat down, he saw Qin Xiang standing at the door. "Father!" He looked at Qin Xiang and was surprised. Seeing him looking at him, he looked down and smiled. "There is still a lot of food left. If I don't eat, it will be a waste." Qin Xiang looked at his youngest son and was startled. There were strands of white hair on his head. When he smiled, there were wrinkles on his face. He was the youngest of the 5 Qin brothers, but he looked much older than his eldest brother. The old man realized that he had not paid attention to his son for a long time. "Those dishes are already cold. If you're not full, just ask the kitchen to make another serving." Qin Xiang brought the file over. When he walked out, he paused and said, "Don't eat too much at night. Rest early and be careful of your body." Qin he nodded. "Father." Qin Xiang heard the voice and turned around. Qin he looked at him and said with a smile, "The court is in turmoil. Although father is in a high position, you still have to be careful." Qin Xiang frowned and said, "Recently, the court has been unprecedentedly stable. How can there be turmoil? Don't believe the rumors outside." Qin he listened respectfully. After he finished, he nodded and said, "Thank you, father, for the reminder. I understand." Qin Xiang took another deep look at him, then turned around and left. 5th young master Qin looked at the leftover soup in front of him. The clear soup reflected his image. He stroked a strand of white hair on his head and stared at the soup in a daze. On the night of the Lantern Festival, it snowed all night. Although the snowfall gradually subsided, it still did not clear up. It was still early in the morning. On the streets of the capital, other than a few shops that had their doors half closed, most of the shops that faced the streets were tightly shut. A woman with her hair wrapped up and wearing only a thin shirt stood in front of a small building and knocked for a long time. When a beautiful woman inside opened the door, she rubbed her face that was red from the cold and smiled. "My sister is a musician in this building. She came to perform on the day of the Lantern Festival and hasn't been back for 2 days. Can I trouble you to call her? She's not in good health and has to take medicine every day." The beautiful woman rubbed her sleepy eyes and yawned. She asked in a muffled voice, "What's your sister's name?" The woman smiled and said, "Her name is Shuang." "Sir, what are they doing?" The proud Lolita lifted the curtain of the carriage window and saw a group of people gathered at the foot of the city wall. She turned her head and asked Li Yi. "They're probably looking at the court's criminal." As the carriage drove over, Li Yi also heard the discussion of some people on the street. It seemed that yesterday, a criminal wanted by the court committed a murder case in the capital. Using the chaos of the Upper Yuan dynasty, he successfully escaped. This made the higher-ups very angry. They did not hesitate to issue a large warrant for his arrest. The bounty was even more generous. They paid a great price to capture this person and bring him to justice. The capital was under the feet of the emperor, and the criminal was a criminal wanted by the court. Coincidentally, it was the Lantern Festival. It was no wonder that the higher-ups had such a big reaction. However, with the warrant being issued, unless the criminal had the ability to change his appearance, it would not be easy for him to escape near the capital. It must be known that around Jingdo, there was a group of madmen who wanted to farm points to raise their ranking. How could they let go of such a good opportunity? In principle, for a criminal wanted by the court with great fanfare to appear in Jingdo and commit another crime was an inconceivable thing. However, there was always an oversight. At this moment, the matter of the criminal was not important to him. The old emperor's health was more important. This snow had come suddenly, and the old emperor's illness had also worsened suddenly. From the beginning, Li Yi knew that there was no possibility of his illness recovering. Sometimes it was all about luck. Even though he had already let go of court affairs and focused on recuperating, no one knew when bad luck would arrive. Li Yi's mood was a bit depressed. Some things could be solved perfectly, and some things could not. Faced with this matter, even he felt a deep sense of helplessness from the bottom of his heart. The carriage suddenly came to a stop. The proud Lolita lost her balance and fell on top of him. A red cloud appeared on her face. In a small voice she said, "Sir, I didn't do it on purpose." Li Yi supported her waist and helped her sit properly. The angry scolding of a palace guard could already be heard from outside. "How do you walk? Don't you have eyes?" After scolding, the guard knocked on the carriage in a panic and asked, "Your Highness, are you all right?" "I'm fine," the proud Lolita replied in a small voice. She then asked, "What happened outside?" The guard immediately said, "A woman suddenly walked out of the alley and almost ran into her. I had no choice but to rein in the horse and disturb your Highness. Please forgive me, your Highness." The proud Lolita asked in a quiet voice, "She didn't hurt anyone, did she?" A guard had already helped the woman who had fallen to the ground up. He furrowed his brows and asked, "Are you all right?" The woman didn't look at him. Her eyes were unfocused as she walked forward in a daze. "Strange person." The guard glanced at her and turned his head. "Your Highness, she didn't hurt anyone. Let's keep going." Li Yi lifted the curtain to take a look, only to see a distant silhouette. He shook his head and lowered the curtain again. After visiting the old emperor, the dark clouds in Li Yi's heart dissipated a little when he walked out of the hall. Naturally, it was because his illness wasn't as serious as he had expected. It was probably because of the sudden drop in temperature that he was having a relapse. A eunuch led him to the side hall and said that the heir and the eldest princess were already waiting there. When Li Yi and the proud Lolita walked in, they found that they weren't the only ones in the side hall. Princess Ning was holding Mingzhu's hand and talking. Li Xian was playing chess with Ning Wang. Seeing them enter, Princess Ning waved at the proud Lolita. "Xiaoning, come quickly, come here." Li Yi bowed slightly and said, "Greetings to Ning Wang and Princess Ning." Every year at the beginning of the year, the nobles from all over would enter the capital. Because Li Xian was in the capital, Ning Wang's family would often stay for a few more days. "Dr. Li, no need to be so courteous." Ning Wang waved his hand and looked at him. He shook his head and said, "In terms of the ability to judge people, I really am not as good as my royal brother. Dr. Li is an outstanding person. I actually misjudged you back then." Forget about bringing Xiao Hong back. If she knew what Lao Feng had been secretly doing for the past 2 years, Lao Feng wouldn't be sitting in the carriage and asking him this question now. With his timid personality, how could he suddenly have such a suicidal idea? Li Yi thought for a moment, looked at him, and asked suspiciously, "You didn't take the girl's body, and now you can't take it anymore, right?" "How could that be?" Feng waved his hands repeatedly. "Young master, even you don't dare to do this kind of thing, how could I?" "Really? Really?" Feng raised a hand. "I swear if I say half a word of lie, let me be struck by lightning." "No sincerity." Li Yi shook his head and said, "It's winter, how could there be lightning?" Boom! As soon as he finished speaking, a thunderous sound suddenly exploded in his ears. Feng's whole body trembled. He looked up at the sky and found that there was no more sound. He looked at Li Yi and asked, "I really didn't do it, could it be that, young master?" Boom! 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 The deafening sound came again, and it hurt people's eardrums. Chapter 876. The rumbling sound came suddenly. Feng turned over and rolled off the carriage. He looked at the sky vigilantly. After listening for a while, he realized that the sound did not come from the sky. He turned his head and saw that not far ahead, there was a woman beating the big drum in front of the yamen. What he heard just now was not thunder, but the drum. He breathed a sigh of relief and jumped back into the carriage. He said, "So someone is beating the court drum." I was scared to death. The court drum was a large drum erected in front of the yamen. It had 2 functions. One was for the county magistrate to beat the drum to gather the crowd when he went to court. The other was for the commoners who had been wronged to beat the drum to express their grievances. Li Yi lifted the curtain and took a look. The woman who had beaten the drum had already been ushered in by the yamen runners. He did not pay much attention to her. He put down the curtain and looked at old Feng. Are you serious about what you said just now? It's not a good way to go on like this. Fong sighed and said, there has to be an end to this matter. Li Yi hung the curtains to the side and asked curiously, how did you and Lil Red meet? Fong leaned against the carriage and looked at the sky. He smiled and said, about a year before you came up the mountain. At first, Li Yi thought that Fong was just a simple and honest man without many thoughts. Later, he found that his thoughts, especially when it came to feelings, were extremely delicate. Under his simple and honest appearance, there was a soul of coquettishness. He and Little Red got to know each other because of the old story of a bear saving the beauty. Later, they met in the jadeite courtyard by chance. As time went by, they became familiar with each other. They communicated with each other across the wall in the jadeite courtyard and gradually developed to the point where they were today. According to Fong, it was not to the point. At present, the two of them only held hands in a pure relationship. The relationship between him and Mrs. Fong should be familial, and Little Red was probably Fong's love. As for how to make the two perfectly fuse, if he knew, he wouldn't have to run between them every day. His own affairs were still a mess, and he couldn't help much with Fong's family affairs. Li Yi could only shake his head and say, let's think about this at length. That's right, let's take our time to think about it. Fong nodded and said, Miss Suemo has already succeeded. Second Miss Ruoqing, Princess Royal, Miss Lin, and even Xiaofan hasn't married yet. I'm afraid that the little princess only has Xiaofan in her heart. We need to think about them one by one. Li Yi thought for a moment and said, well, I'll ask Rui to go over and talk to Mrs. Fong. Tell her that you want to bring another mistress back. I know that if anything happens to this woman, it will attract the attention of people with ulterior motives. Zhang Shichen nodded and said no more. The two of them discussed a few more things before Cui Qingming left the yamen through the back door. When he stepped onto the carriage, his body paused slightly and he turned his head to look at a guard in front of the carriage. He stretched out his hand and lightly waved it in the air. Inside the yamen, at the dining table, a woman heard the rumbling outside and put down her bowl and chopsticks. She said with dissatisfaction, what is going on outside? There is no end to it, is there? A yamen runner came in from outside and said with a bitter face, My lord, that woman did not listen to our advice at all. She has begun to beat the drum and complain about her grievances again. Zhang Shichen put down his chopsticks and his face darkened. He said, the capital yamen is not a place for her to behave atrociously. Guards, arrest that woman. Give her 20 strokes of the cane and temporarily put her in prison. The yamen runner was stunned and said with some uncertainty, My lord, this punishment, isn't it a bit too heavy? Zhang Shichen waved his hand. No matter. The prestige of the yamen is not to be provoked. Only a heavy punishment will serve as a warning. Just be careful when executing the punishment. The yamen runner said no more and bowed. This subordinate obeys. Chapter 877. At the entrance of the capital magistrate's office, the woman beating the drum was once again stopped by a bailiff. Many passers-by had stopped to watch from the side of the street. They pointed at the woman not far away and whispered to each other. I saw her beating the drum here early in the morning. I wonder what kind of injustice she has suffered? I heard that it's because of her sister's death. I also heard the bailiff say that she's a criminal. I'm afraid it's not because of the case at the wonderful Sound Pavilion 2 days ago. That evil thief's wanted poster is posted all over the street. What's she doing here? Could it be that there's more to this case? As the crowd discussed animatedly, a bailiff walked out from inside and looked at the woman. He waved his hand and said, Take her down. This is the capital magistrate's office. Is this a place for you to mess around? The bailiff looked at her indifferently and turned his head to say, Sir has ordered that this woman has repeatedly challenged the magistrate's authority and obstructed official business. Take her in and give her 20 strokes. Then he walked forward and dispersed the crowd on the street. He loudly said, There's nothing to see here. Disperse, disperse. Although the drum at the entrance of the yamen was used by the people to seek justice, it was not allowed to be beaten randomly and disrupt the yamen's normal order. However, even though there was such a rule, the woman had just lost a loved one. It was understandable that she was grieving. To punish her like this was somewhat unreasonable in the eyes of the crowd. However, this was not something they could discuss. They could only shake their heads and disperse as they watched the woman being taken in. Boss, are we really going to give her 20 strokes? A bailiff looked at the thin woman and said hesitantly, "What if she dies after 20 strokes? You pig brain." The bailiff fiercely knocked on the man's head and said angrily, "Sir has said to pay attention to propriety. If she dies, you'll pay with your life." The bailiff who was knocked on the head put on a long face and asked, "What propriety?" The bailiff waved his hand. "It's enough. After beating her, take her to jail and lock her up first. Don't let her come out and cause trouble again." A moment later, the constable came to the pale-faced woman who was pressed on the stool. The scene of the woman's death that night appeared in his mind, and a trace of pity appeared on his face. He shook his head slightly and waved his hand. "Give me the board, I'll do it myself." When the two bailiffs escorted the woman into the prison, they felt that today was an eye-opener. After working in the yamen for so long, this was the first time they saw someone who could walk to the prison on her own after being flogged. "I don't want it anymore. I don't want the sachet anymore. I don't want the lantern anymore." Today, Li Yi did not have the time to fight with her for 300 rounds to correct her mistakes, because today was the day that Lin Wanru and Lin Yong set off to return to the Qi Kingdom. The caravan of merchants from the Qi Kingdom who came along with them had left the capital city long after the Lantern Festival. They had stayed for more than 2 months. If they did not return soon, the Lin family's business in the Qi Kingdom would most likely have an unforeseen event. He had discussed all the details of the cooperation with her a month ago. This time, he would also send a caravan of merchants and guards to escort them to the Qi Kingdom. The caravan arrived at the city gate. Rui and Lin Wanru were talking. Rui came down from the carriage and patted her hand, saying, "It's a long journey from here to the Qi Kingdom. Sister Lin, be careful on the way." Lin Wanru smiled and said, "Although it's a long journey, we've gone back and forth several times. With these guards escorting us all the way, you don't have to worry, sister." Then she walked to Li Yi's side, looked at him, smiled and stretched out her hand, saying, "Goodbye." Li Yi was stunned, then he also stretched out his hand, and the two of them shook hands. Lin Wanru turned her head, looked at Rui, and explained, "This is a kind of etiquette in our hometown, called the handshake ceremony. It's used to greet friends who have not seen each other for a long time, or to bid farewell to friends who are about to be separated." Lin Yong looked at this scene in astonishment. After scratching his head, he also stretched out his hand to Li Yi, and said with a sad face, "Li brothers, goodbye." Li Yi punched him hard on the shoulder and said with a smile, "Why are you pulling a long face? It's not like you won't see each other. In less than half a year, I'm afraid you'll have to come back to the capital again." Lin Yong smiled honestly and said embarrassedly, "It's not that I can't bear to part with you, Li brothers." Li Yi smiled and said, "Two men, don't be so sentimental. I can't bear to part with the food cooked by Li brothers." After Lin Yong finished speaking, Li Yi was stunned, then he waved his hand and said, "Let's go, let's go." He watched Lin Yong get into the carriage with a big smile, leaning against the carriage and waving at him. When Lin Wanru bent down to lift the curtain, she looked back and disappeared behind the thick curtain in the next moment. The convoy slowly drove out, and when the last carriage could not be seen, Li Yi turned his head and said, "Let's go back." "Mother." The city gate was crowded with people and it was noisy, but he and Rui both had extraordinary hearing. How could they not hear this childish and somewhat muffled voice? Rui looked down at the little fellow in the swaddling clothes, and a happy expression appeared on her face. She suddenly looked at Li Yi and asked, "Husband, did you hear that just now?" Although the 6-month-old child could not understand language yet, under the deliberate guidance of his mother, he was already able to spit out words one by one. Li Yi sighed and said, "As expected, my wife still won." Li Duan also seemed to feel Rui's joy. He curled up in the swaddling clothes and smiled. He opened his mouth again and made a vague sound. "Little a mother." Chapter 878. Li Yi gently poked the little fellow's soft face and said, "If you want to call me mother, there's no little. Little. Mother." The two words he said were not clear. They were vague and could barely be distinguished. A 6-month-old child, even if he was gifted or had been guided early, could only say a few more words. It was unlikely that he would understand the meaning. Li Yi guessed that apart from Rui, Xiaofan was the one who spent the most time with him. She had heard so much that when she forced herself to say it, she would naturally be confused. However, in this way, who was the winner or Rui? In detail, Xiaonyang was also a mother, so Rui was a little better. When he returned home, the proud Lolita had already come over. She bounced out of the yard and asked, "Sir, where did you and Sister Rui go?" The little fellow stretched out her hand from Rui's arms and said vaguely, "Little mother." Li Yi remembered that when he made the bet with Rui, the proud Lolita was the referee, so she was the one to announce the final result. The proud and pampered Lolita's eyes spun as she said, "But little Duan, didn't call out, father or mother." "Sir and big sister Rui didn't win." Li Yi pinched her face and asked, "Neither of us won, so who won?" "If neither of us won, then of course the referee won." The proud Lolita said seriously, "So sir, you have to promise me one thing." "What is it?" As soon as Li Yi said it, he felt that something was wrong. How could there be a referee in a match? However, the proud Lolita didn't give him a chance to change his words. She said with a smile, "I haven't thought about it yet. I'll tell you when I've thought about it." She seemed to be afraid that Li Yi would go back on his words, so she ran away quickly after saying that. Rui looked at him, smiled and said, "Since my husband didn't lose, then the agreement between me and my husband." Li Yi waved his hand and said righteously, "Lil mother is also a mother, so it's still my wife who wins." Walking on the street with the incognito eldest princess and looking at the orderly Jingdo, Li Yi turned his head and asked, "How has the emperor been these 2 days?" Emingzu shook her head and said, "It's better than before, but I'm still resting in bed most of the time." Li Yi didn't know how to continue this topic. The old emperor's health was deteriorating year by year. Even Li Yi himself wasn't confident. A few carriages slowly approached from the front. Li Yi and she moved back a little. Looking at the carriages slowly moving away, Li Yi murmured, "These carriages look a little familiar." Emingzu turned her head to look and said calmly, "An envoy from the Qi kingdom." Li Yi asked in surprise, why did the Qi kingdom send an envoy here again? From what he remembered, ever since the third prince of the Qi kingdom had caused a ruckus in the Jingdo, the envoy from the Qi kingdom had returned. Later on, the friction between the two countries intensified. Even now, there were still occasional disputes on the border. What was the purpose of the Qi kingdom sending an envoy here again at this time? To negotiate for peace. Emingzu looked at the bustling crowd in front of them and said, "The emperor of the Qi kingdom is seriously ill. I'm afraid he doesn't have much time left. The eldest prince and the third prince of the Qi kingdom are locked in a fierce struggle for the throne. The court is also divided into 2 factions that are evenly matched. This time, the envoy from the Qi kingdom has come to the capital on behalf of the eldest prince to negotiate for peace with us. The eldest prince is the crown prince of the Qi kingdom. Even if the Qi kingdom doesn't value the eldest son as much as other countries, the eldest prince has, after all, entered the East Palace. He's the heir apparent in name. There's no lack of support in the court. Why would he need our help?" At this delicate moment, the eldest prince had sent an envoy to negotiate for peace. Naturally, it wasn't just to negotiate for peace. It was likely that he wanted to borrow some power from the Jing kingdom to deal with the third prince. For the crown prince to end up like this, it was truly tragic. Emingzu glanced at him and said, "Originally, it was indeed like this. Although the third prince of the Qi kingdom has a reputation for being virtuous, he's still the third prince. He doesn't have a legitimate title. However, not long ago, the crown prince of the Qi kingdom turned the entire Qi kingdom into a mess. The people's grievances rose everywhere and the hearts of the people were shaken. Many in the court were disappointed in him and turned to support the third prince. That's why the 2 of them are evenly matched now. It seems there's such a thing." Li Yi nodded and said, "What did the court officials say?" Emingzu shook her head and said, "They only revealed their intention to negotiate for peace. They haven't formally proposed it yet. My imperial father's health isn't good. He hasn't summoned them these few days. I'm afraid they'll have to wait until my imperial father's next court session." Li Yi didn't have much of an opinion on the matter of negotiating for peace. However, from this matter, he could feel the changes in the Jing kingdom over the past 1 or 2 years. He could still remember when he first came to the capital. The carriage driven by the envoy of the Qi kingdom still dared to run amok on the busy streets of the capital. In just 2 short years, the envoy no longer had that kind of arrogance and despotism. He was even more restrained than some of the nobles in the capital. However, when he left the Qi kingdom, he didn't hear anything about the emperor of the Qi kingdom. Could it be that the saying, "Ing Hua guards his heart," was really true? It was just that the person Ing Hua was guarding was not the old emperor, but the one in the Qi kingdom. He wasn't so free that he would even worry about the affairs of the Qi kingdom, so he didn't ask more. This time, the princess went out incognito to see the suffering of the people. At the same time, she also went home to get a meal and spar with Mississippi Lou. In the last few spars, Mississippi Lou had always been slightly better. She was usually busy with political affairs, so it was impossible for her to practice martial arts every day like Mississippi Lou. Occasionally, she would spar with him. Perhaps she had even learned something from it and progressed quickly. Of course, in this way, the eldest princess had lost both in person and in spirit. Although compared to before, the gap between the two had shrunk a lot. After drinking too much soup, the effect was naturally not as obvious. In front of Mississippi Lou, it would be difficult for her to raise her chest in this lifetime. Emingzu casually pointed to the front and said, "In front is the government office of the capital. Let's go in and take a look." Li Yi nodded. He hadn't seen County Magistrate Lou for a long time. He didn't know if the hurdle in his heart had been crossed or not. "You two, what grievances do you have? Don't be anxious. Speak one by one." Sitting in the hall, Jingdo Magistrate Lu Dayo gently tapped the gavel and pointed to the two people below. An old man below replied, "Sir, my daughter went to the river to wash clothes yesterday morning and has not returned yet." Hearing this, Lu Dayo furrowed his brows and looked at the other person. He asked, "What about you? Why did you report the case?" The man's expression was sorrowful as he said, "My lord, this commoner's wife returned to her parents' home 3 days ago and hasn't returned since. This morning, this commoner went to her in-laws' home to inquire, but they said that they had never seen her. My lord, you must uphold justice for this commoner. 2 more have gone missing?" Lu Dayo's brows furrowed even more. In 1 month, there had been over 10 women who had mysteriously disappeared. He was about to open his mouth to ask more details when his eyes flickered and his body suddenly shook. He quickly walked out and bowed. "Greetings, Your Highness, Sir Li." Prime Minister Qin walked out of the door and said to an elegant young man, "After you go back, help me bring a message to the Grand Tutor. Tell him that in 2 days, I will come to visit him." "I will certainly bring the message." Chu Ping bowed and said, "I will remember Prime Minister Qin's teachings. I will take my leave today." Prime Minister Qin nodded and said, "Qin Yu, go see Chu Ping off." Qin Yu walked forward and extended his hand. "Brother Chu, please." Chu Ping looked at him and smiled. "Thank you, Brother Qin Yu." Chu Ping walked first and Qin Yu followed behind him. His footsteps were very slow because the young man in front of him seemed to have trouble moving his feet. His steps were deep and shallow, and his pace was also very slow. Prime Minister Qin watched the two of them leave and slightly shook his head. The two of them were of the same age, but one of them spent all day visiting the great scholars and learned scholars in the capital, seeking knowledge and dispelling doubts. The other person was a playboy that everyone in the capital hated. In the garden, the large man glanced outside and asked, "Who is that person?" "These past few months, he has been coming to our house every few days. The successor of Grand Tutor Chu. He is thirsty for knowledge and is indeed different from those playboys." The middle-aged man's gaze looked in the direction that the young man disappeared in and slowly said. The large man nodded and said, "He looks all right, but his legs are not very nimble." The middle-aged man's gaze was still looking in that direction. After a long time, he withdrew his gaze and looked at the large man. "You've been by my side for 2 years, the large man scratched his head and said. "I forgot, but it seems so. 2 years is not a short time." The middle-aged man sighed and stood up. He looked at the large man and said, "There is an important matter that I need you to do." The large man revealed a puzzled expression. "What is it?" The middle-aged man waved his hand and the large man moved his ear closer. "Fifth Master, don't worry. Leave this matter to me. There will be no problem." After a moment, the large man's face revealed an excited expression. After patting his chest, he quickly left. The middle-aged man watched him leave. After a long time, he sat down again and took a sip of tea. He muttered, "It has already been 2 years. Chapter 879. In the Yamen, Emingzu frowned and asked, "Within a month, there have been more than a dozen cases of women and girls going missing near the capital?" Lu Dayo nodded and said, "Since the first case a month ago, including the 2 today, there have been 13 cases. The security in the capital had always been good, and there were countless heroes of the martial arts world among the people. There were very few major cases. After the first few cases of women going missing, he didn't pay too much attention. But now, There were a total of 13 cases. As a small magistrate of the capital, he would soon be unable to handle it. Although the court had repeatedly banned the trafficking of women and children, there were still people who dared to do it under the feet of the emperor of Jingdo. Li Mingzhu looked at the two people in the hall, whose faces were full of sorrow, and turned her head to ask, "Have you found any clues?" Lu Dayou shook his head and said, "I have sent people to investigate many places, and even had the constables stand guard at night. But the thief is very careful and doesn't commit the crime in the same place. Until now there have been no clues." "What did Lu Yizhi say?" Li Yi thought for a moment and looked at him and asked, "Has the case been submitted to the Ministry of Justice?" Lu Dayou shook his head again. "Assistant Minister Lu is busy with work and has a few major cases on hand. I think that if it is not necessary, it is better not to give him trouble." Li Yi nodded and waved his hand. "Go and bring the files of these cases over." Hearing this, Lu Dayou was delighted. He had already seen official Li's ability when he was in Qing and Prefecture. Seeing that the advisor next to him was still in a daze, he kicked him and hurriedly said, "Hurry and bring those files over." Then he looked at Li Yi and Zhang eldest princess and said, "Your Highness, official Li, please go to the back hall." In the back hall of the yamen, Emingzu saw Li Yi flipping through the files without saying a word. She couldn't help but ask, "Did you find anything?" "Don't worry. Do you think I'm the reincarnation of Lord Bao?" Li Yi flipped through the files and turned his head. "Lord Lu, please bring me a map of the vicinity of the capital." County Magistrate Lu was more reliable and didn't have as many questions as Princess Royal. Without saying anything, he quickly asked someone to take out a detailed map. February 13th, Yang Village. Li Yi looked back at County Magistrate Lu and asked, "Where is Yang Village?" County Magistrate Lu casually pointed to a place above, and Li Yi drew a circle at that location. Li Yi flipped open another scroll. 16th of February, Wei Village. "Where is Wei Village?" County Magistrate Lu pointed. "Here." At this moment, he had already understood Li Yi's meaning. Even if he didn't know what Li Yi was going to do, he still took the initiative to mark the locations of the missing women on those files. Seeing Li Yi begin to connect those marked small circles with lines, a big net immediately appeared on the map. After that, County Magistrate Lu circled the place with the densest lines on the net. If he still didn't understand what Li Yi was doing, he wouldn't have been able to sit in the position of the magistrate of the capital for so long. With admiration on his face, he immediately bowed and said, "Thank you for your advice, official Li." Li Yi put down the pen, waved his hand, pointed at the big circle drawn at the end, and said, "Send people to visit this place secretly. Be careful not to be discovered and alert the enemy. If you find something, don't act rashly. These people have committed crimes repeatedly without being discovered, so they can't be ordinary people. At that time, the Secret Intelligence Office will cooperate with you." Since he had encountered this matter, he could only do it conveniently. That was all he could do. Walking out of the county government, the eldest princess shook her head and said, "There are people who are so bold in the territory of the emperor. If we are far away from the capital, I don't know how chaotic it will be. Where there are people, there are evil. The great harmony of the world is just an ideal. It's already amazing to make the world seem peaceful on the surface." Li Yi turned his head to look at her and said, "Miss, work hard." There was no obvious change in the expression on Mingzhu's face. When he sent her to the gate of the palace, he suddenly said, "Don't forget what day it is the day after tomorrow." "What day is the day after tomorrow?" Li Yi's heart skipped a beat. He, who had been traumatized by this, couldn't help but tremble when he heard similar words again. Last time, Mississippi Lu told him not to forget what day it was 7 days later. He racked his brains but couldn't remember it. It was not Rui's birthday, not her birthday, not Xiaofan's birthday, and not even the 3rd anniversary of their meeting. He had been on tenterhooks for a whole day. He used a roundabout strategy to ask Xiaofan and found out that his birthday was 7 days later. He had been very depressed about this. How could there be such a strange question in the world? He asked tentatively, "Is it 2 years, 7 months, and how many days?" Seeing that the expression on her face became confused, he immediately changed his words. "No, that's your birthday. No, your birthday just passed." Seeing her frown, a light flashed in Li Yi's mind. He suddenly said, "I remember. The day after tomorrow is the first day of your menstruation." Remember to drink more water and rest more. Don't get tired. They would respect each other's sovereignty and territorial integrity, not invade each other's territory, and not interfere with each other's internal affairs. They would be equal and mutually beneficial, and they would coexist peacefully. As soon as he said this, not only did Emperor Jing stand up from his throne, but the court was also in an uproar. The biggest foreign threat of the Jing kingdom was the Qi kingdom. The two kingdoms had been fighting for decades, and the Jing kingdom was the weaker one. Over the past decades, the Qi kingdom had asked for peace several times, paying a heavy price for it. This time, it was the Qi kingdom's turn to ask for peace. This was the first time. As the subjects of the Jing kingdom, their hearts were filled with a sense of belonging and pride. Had the Jing kingdom of today grown to the point that even the Qi kingdom dared not underestimate it? Without waiting for the subjects of the Jing kingdom to say anything, the leader of the envoys bowed and stepped forward. He said in a loud voice, "To show our sincerity, on behalf of the Crown Prince of the Qi kingdom, we ask His Majesty the Emperor to marry the eldest princess of your kingdom. We also promise that after the Crown Prince ascends to the throne, we will immediately confer the title of Imperial Concubine to Her Highness." As soon as he said this, the court, which had been a little noisy, immediately quieted down. Someone was startled for a moment, then frowned. Some people were stunned at first, and then their faces showed a look of wild joy. Li Yi looked at the envoy who was holding the letter of credence from the Qi kingdom, then raised his head to look up. The old emperor frowned. Her Highness the princess was expressionless. She retracted her gaze, and there was not much change in her expression. Someone immediately stepped forward and said bluntly, "Your Majesty, we can negotiate for peace, but the Crown Prince of the Qi kingdom must never marry the eldest princess." "I second the motion. I second the motion." As soon as Prime Minister Qin said this, many people in the court stepped forward. The Qi kingdom taking the initiative to negotiate for peace was, of course, a very honorable thing to do. If word of this got out, it would raise the prestige of the kingdom. But for the Crown Prince of the Qi kingdom to marry the eldest princess, it would be a fool's dream. The importance of Her Highness the princess to the Jing kingdom was self-evident. It could even be said that although she was a princess, she played the role of a monarch. Moreover, she was a wise monarch that was rarely seen in decades. Without Her Highness the princess, what would become of the imperial court of the Jing kingdom? Normal people would not do such a thing to give such a wise monarch to the Qi kingdom for nothing. As for negotiating for peace, the Qi kingdom did not want to discuss it. After all, they could not defeat the soldiers of the Jing kingdom who had celestial punishment. In short, peace could not be discussed, but marrying the princess was out of the question. Cui Qingming looked at the old man who stepped forward. His expression was calm, but his fists were tightly clenched in his sleeves. He tilted his head to look, and an official stepped forward and said, "Your Majesty, if the two countries go to war, how many people will be plunged into misery and suffering? How many brave soldiers of the Jing kingdom will be sacrificed? Now that the Qi kingdom has proposed to negotiate for peace, it is a blessing for the people. I hope that Your Majesty will reconsider." After this official spoke, many people stepped forward to agree. Both sides stuck to their own views and argued endlessly. Emperor Jing put down the letter of credence and pressed his hand down. The imperial court immediately returned to silence. "We can negotiate for peace, but don't mention the marriage proposal again," he said plainly, showing his most obvious attitude. The envoy of the Qi kingdom raised his head and said, "Negotiating for peace is a matter that benefits both countries. The Qi kingdom has shown enough sincerity. Your country should also show some sincerity, right?" As soon as he said this, all the officials in the imperial court looked at the envoy of the Qi kingdom with unfriendly gazes. The envoy of the Qi kingdom was implying that if the Jing kingdom did not marry the eldest princess to the Jing kingdom and did not show enough sincerity, then there was no need to discuss the peace. "Your Majesty, this matter is beneficial to the people. Please reconsider. Your Majesty, don't let the people be plunged into misery and suffering again. Your Majesty, please think of the people of the Jing kingdom and the soldiers at the front line." When a few more people stepped forward, Emperor Jing frowned and looked at a certain place below. Li Yi stepped forward at the right time and looked at those people. He asked, "Accepting the Qi kingdom's negotiation for peace and marrying the eldest princess to the Jing kingdom is to save millions of people and prevent the people from being plunged into misery and suffering?" The leader of the group scoffed coldly and said, If it can prevent the war between the two countries, why not? Then, in the end, can it be avoided? Li Yi looked at him and then at the people around him. He asked again, the Jing Kingdom and the Qi Kingdom have negotiated for peace so many times. Did they really achieve what this lord said? The official was speechless. If negotiating for peace was really useful, it would have been enough to negotiate for peace once. The envoy of the Qi Kingdom would not have appeared in the hall now. Li Yi looked at the courtiers in the hall and said, everyone knows that the Qi Kingdom has the heart of a tiger and a wolf. They have abandoned the treaty more than once. What credibility do they have? Moreover, Your Majesty is ill and the eldest princess is assisting you in ruling the country. This is a critical time. How can you marry the Qi Kingdom? Moreover, the crown prince of the Qi Kingdom has lost the support of the people and may not even be able to sit on the throne. What right do you have to make such a promise? Haha, you're right. Old General Shui laughed and walked out. He said, sincerity? What sincerity do you want? Do you want Tianfa? Another old general walked out and laughed. He said, the Qi Kingdom is the invader. What's there to talk about negotiating for peace? If you want to retreat, do it quickly. If you want to fight, the soldiers of the Jing Kingdom will not be afraid of you. Prime Minister Shen stood out and nodded. He said, Your Majesty, I think Dr. Li is right. The Minister of War, Yan Bing, stepped forward and said, I agree. The Minister of Revenue, Qin Huan, stood beside him. I agree. The Minister of Left Minister, Dong Wenyun. Those who stepped forward were all important courtiers in the imperial court. The two prime ministers had the same opinion. The Shen family and the Wang family were also standing behind Jin Zi Guanglu. The opinions of others were actually insignificant. Cui Qingming looked at the row of people standing in front of him. He clenched his fists so tightly that his nails dug deep into his palms. Soon, he loosened his fists helplessly. Regarding the negotiation for peace with the envoy of the Qi Kingdom, the opinions of the big shots in the imperial court were unanimous. Peace could be negotiated, but marrying the eldest princess was out of the question. If it worked, they could negotiate. If it didn't work, they could get out. The Qi Kingdom was still the Qi Kingdom of the past. But the Jing Kingdom was no longer the weak Jing Kingdom of the past. Li Yi ate a mouthful of egg-fried rice. He looked at the eldest princess and said, You are right. The negotiation for peace with the envoy of the Qi Kingdom is fake. They want to use this opportunity to get the help of the Jing Kingdom to help the eldest prince ascend the throne. Emingzu held the wine cup, but she didn't eat. She didn't seem to be in a good mood. She looked at him and asked, What do you think about the peace marriage? Li Yi thought for a while and said, Peace marriage. Discord is moral integrity. Peace is also a diplomatic method. As for how I think about it, it can't be generalized. This is what you usually use to fool father. Emingzu swirled the wine cup and said, I want to listen to your heart. Heart. Li Yi raised his wine cup and clinked it with her. He said without hesitation, I don't care if it's the Qi Kingdom or the Zhao Kingdom. Of course, I won't let you marry them. Chapter 881. The emperor and ministers of the Jing Kingdom had firmly rejected the proposal of the envoy from the Qi Kingdom. There was no hesitation, which meant that there was no room for negotiation. The eldest princess was not only the eldest princess. She also knew many secrets of the Jing Kingdom, including Tianfa, which could not be known to outsiders. These secrets could never be leaked to the Qi Kingdom. Not to mention that the current situation in the court depended on the princess. Without the eldest princess, the construction of the academy would come to a standstill. The implementation of the marriage policy would also encounter huge obstacles. The envoy from the Qi Kingdom did not propose any more peace talks. The morning court session ended on bad terms. After returning to the office of the Grand Herald, he was not in a hurry to leave, as if he still had a glimmer of hope. As the current leader of the Cui family, Cui Qingming's face darkened the moment he stepped out of the palace. The envoy from the Qi Kingdom is seeking peace with the intention of marrying the eldest princess. This is an opportunity that we cannot miss. We cannot let it go like this. After hearing the news, a man from the Cui family walked out anxiously and said hurriedly, Li Yi, this kid, has already grown up. Cui Qingming pressed his palm heavily on the table and murmured, You didn't see the scene in the court today. Just relying on the remaining power of our Chui family in the court is no longer enough to contend against him. But we... As soon as the man spoke, someone hurried in and said, "There is news from the palace. Her ladyship sent a message." Chui Qingming stood up and looked at the lady official who walked into the room with everyone else. The lady official glanced at Chui Qingming and the others. There was no expression on her face. She said calmly, "Her ladyship asked me to ask you, Lord Chui, what are you waiting for?" Chui Qingming clenched his fists. After a while, he nodded and said, "Tell her ladyship that I know what to do." The 6-month-old Li Duan was already restless. Although he could not walk, he could already turn over on his own. He could even walk when supported by an adult. Li Yi planned to build a carriage for the child to learn how to walk. It should be ready in 2 months at most. Eming Zuli is going to be married off to the Qi kingdom? When he was sketching in the room, Mississippi Lu suddenly walked in and asked out of the blue. Li Yi raised his head to look at her, then lowered his head and asked casually, "Who told you that?" Mississippi Lu walked over and took a look. She stood aside and said, "It's just a rumor." Li Yi shook his head and said, "Don't worry, she won't marry anyone who marries to the Qi kingdom. Even if she wants to, she can't. No one in the imperial court will agree to it." Mississippi Lu crossed her arms and murmured, "A 19-year-old princess should have married long ago." Li Yi raised his head and looked at her in surprise. "If I remember correctly, you seem to be a few days older than her, right?" Mississippi Lu turned to look at him and nodded. "You're right. So, what are you trying to say?" "I told you, my memory can't be wrong." Li Yi lowered his head and continued to draw the blueprint. He murmured, "It's good that she's older, it's good that she's older." After drawing the blueprint, the next thing to do was to make and polish it. The finished product still needed to be tested and adjusted, but these could be left to the craftsman. If it wasn't for Mississippi Lu's reminder, Li Yi wouldn't have realized that she was already 19 years old. Even Xiao Huan had crossed the threshold of 17 years old. She was much more sensible and was about to become a young lady. Only that Tsundere Lolita was still the same as when they first met. It seemed that she hadn't changed at all. She was still as playful as before. She could even play with the 6-month-old Li Duan. This also saved her and Rui a lot of trouble. Li Yi walked into the room and saw the little fellow lying on his back on the bed. The Tsundere Lolita was lying by the bed, blinking her big eyes and looking curiously at the even smaller thing in the little fellow's split pants. Finally, at a certain moment, she couldn't help but reach out and pull it. County Magistrate Lu supported his chin with one hand. There was a thick file in front of him, but his mind wasn't on it. His eyes were blurred. His upper and lower eyelids touched each other and quickly opened again. In the past month, more than 10 cases of missing women had attracted the attention of the higher-ups. They had strictly ordered him to solve the cases within a time limit. However, a few days had passed, and there was no news of those thieves. He hadn't slept for a day and a night since last night. "Your Excellency, good news. Good news." Seeing a yamen runner running in from outside with a face full of surprise, County Magistrate Lu quivered. He immediately stood up and asked, "Is there any progress in the case?" The yamen runner shook his head and said, "It's the young master's appointment. The young master has been hired by the Ministry of Revenue." County Magistrate Lu waved his hand weakly. The officials of the Ministry of Revenue had already discussed this matter with him. After that good-for-nothing boy entered the mathematics college, he was enlightened and graduated with excellent grades. He didn't lose face for County Magistrate Lu. This time, he went to the Ministry of Revenue to temper himself, so he didn't need to worry about his future anymore. He waved his hand and said, "I see. You can go now." He was so sleepy that he lay on the table and planned to rest for a while. Not long after he closed his eyes, a thunderous voice rang in his ears again. "Your Excellency, good news." County Magistrate Lu patted the table and didn't even bother to open his eyes. He said, "Okay, I see. You can go now. I'll sleep for a while." After lying on the table and closing his eyes for a while, he felt a little refreshed. He picked up the file and was about to read it. Seeing that the yamen runner was still standing below, he asked, "Anything else?" "Your Excellency, what should we do next?" County Magistrate Lu frowned and said, "What next?" "Detective Zhao has found some clues about the missing woman. He came back to ask you for your opinion. When did you find it? County Magistrate Lu suddenly stood up from his seat and asked, "Why didn't you tell me earlier?" The Yamen runner was stunned and said, "Didn't you say that you already knew?" County Magistrate Lu had been worried about this matter these days. There was progress in the case, but they didn't tell him immediately. What if during this period of time something happened? He glared at the Yamen runner and said, gritting his teeth, "Say it." The Yamen runner trembled and immediately said, "Thanks to your guidance, we followed your method and narrowed the scope of the secret investigation. As expected, we found some problems in a place outside the city. Great Scholar Sun has studied scriptures all his life. Although he isn't as good as Qin Wen, he still has unique insights in some aspects. He is far away from the downtown area and lives in a hut outside the city. It took you a lot of effort to find him. Go now." Chu Ping bowed respectfully and said, "I'll take my leave." Pinger's leg. Watching Chu Ping limp away, the middle-aged man stood beside Grand Tutor Chu and sighed. That's a human life, a living human life. Grand Tutor Chu watched Chu Ping leave and shook his head. And he only injured one of his legs from kneeling. I only hope that he can remember this lesson and not repeat the same mistake. The middle-aged man nodded and said, "He has been studying wholeheartedly these days. He has always been aware of his mistakes and has the intention to change." As soon as he finished speaking, a servant from the Chu family came to report that Cui Qingming from the Cui family had come to visit. He leaned against the carriage and said faintly, "If they want to investigate, then let them go to the capital governor's manor." The coachman lowered the curtain and said in a low voice, "I understand." Outside the capital, in a certain village, in front of the grass at the village entrance, Chu Ping bowed slightly to the white-haired old man in front of him. "Many thanks to Great Scholar Sunday. Today, with Great Scholar Sun's guidance, Chu Ping has benefited greatly. The younger generation will surpass us in time. The younger generation will surpass us in time. We are old now. The future belongs to you young people." The old man stroked his white beard and said, "Send my regards to the Grand Tutor. I will pay a visit another day. I bid you farewell, elder." "I won't be sending you off." Chu Ping walked all the way to the village entrance. There were already people waiting there. A well-dressed young man stretched out his hand and pointed at the carriage beside him. He smiled and said, "Master Chu, please." On a high hill outside the village, a constable was lying in the grass. He put away the cylindrical object in front of him and furrowed his brows. They had been following that carriage all day, but from the logo on it, it belonged to a small noble family in the capital. This matter was a bit troublesome to deal with. He turned his head and said in a low voice, "Keep a close watch here. I will go back and report to the master." At the same time, in the capital governor's manor, Zhang Shichen put down his teacup and looked at Cui Qingming. "You don't have to worry about that woman. To prevent her from causing trouble outside, I have already locked her up in prison. As long as we find a reason, she can be locked up like this." Cui Qingming nodded and said, "The matter I mentioned just now. Don't worry. I will also have people keep a close eye on that place. There won't be any delays. This matter is very important. I will leave it to Brother Tseng." Zhang Shichen looked at him and said solemnly, "Brother Cui can rest assured that I will handle this matter. Bide your time." Li Yi crumpled a piece of paper into a ball and threw it into the lake. He didn't quite understand the 4 words that Zhang Shichen had sent him. The arrival of the Qi Kingdom's envoy to the capital was a great opportunity that couldn't be more obvious. Inciting public opinion, colluding with the court officials to force the abdication of the throne, pressuring the emperor, and so on. With a whole set of gifts, the Cui family and their accomplices were almost finished. But if others didn't make a move, it wouldn't be good for him to make the first move. In this way, Lord Tsang's words of "bide your time" seemed a little out of the blue. He didn't finish his words, and this half was unclear and vague, which was really annoying. Her Royal Highness threw a stone at the lake, leaving a long mark on the surface of the lake. It flew to the other side and disappeared. She asked casually, "This time, what other reason can they think of?" Li Yi imitated her and threw a stone. The stone sank into the lake with a thud. "I don't know." He shook his head and thought for a moment. Suddenly he said, "Why don't we be a little more ruthless?" Mingzu looked at him and asked, "How ruthless?" Li Yi pointed at the ripples on the surface of the lake and said, "Take advantage of the quiet night, when the moon is dark and the wind is strong, and send a few masters to kidnap Cui Qingza, Cui Qingming, and a few other important figures of the Cui family. And then, Li Yi threw another stone into the lake. Emingzu looked at the ripples on the surface of the lake and asked, "What if Grand Tutor Chu stands out and opposes?" Another thump came from the surface of the lake. "Noble consort Cui? Thud. What about all the opposing officials in the court and all the people in the world?" "Then forget it." Li Yi shook his head and lay on the lawn with his hands behind his head. He sighed and said, "In this way, the fish in this lake can't be eaten in the future. Therefore, this kind of thing couldn't be rushed." Her side still had to take the righteous side, and basically could only rely on the other side to court death. This was very passive and not easy. As a friend, he did this for her. If she didn't reward him with a very, very high official title in the future, even the heavens wouldn't be able to bear it. Emingzu knew that he was just joking. She imitated him and lay on the lawn with her hands behind her head, looking at the blue sky. At this moment, all the heavy court affairs seemed to be completely erased from her mind like the cloudless sky. "You?" Li Yi turned sideways and was about to say something. His mouth opened halfway and his whole body froze. When she lay on the lawn with her hands behind her head, the clothes on her chest tightened, revealing a seductive curve. The two of them were very close to each other. Because of the perspective at this moment, Li Yi couldn't tell who was the winner between her and Mississippi Lu. In the small pavilion in the lake, Li Xian sighed. He always felt that there was something between Li Yi and Emingzu that he didn't know besides the love between a man and a woman. Unfortunately, the two of them denied it every time. He couldn't get any useful information from either of them. Beside him, the proud Lolita held her chin with her hands and looked in the same direction as him. She also sighed slowly. Chapter 883. What happened to the Peng family? Hearing Detective Zhao's words, County Magistrate Lu frowned and said, "He's just a county magistrate. How can he handle such a big thing?" Detective Zhao asked tentatively, "Then I'll take some people to the Peng family now." "Wait a minute." County Magistrate Lu waved his hand and said, "Don't rush. Don't alert the enemy before there is conclusive evidence. A small noble was still a noble with a title of nobility. If it was the Peng family, it would be fine. Not to mention a county magistrate, even a duke would not be able to handle it. But if it was not the Peng family, it would be really troublesome to frame a noble for no reason." While he was thinking about it, a runner suddenly came to report that people from the capital government had arrived. County Magistrate Lu looked up and saw the leading official. He cupped his hands and said, "Lord Han." "Lord Lu." Lord Han cupped his hands and returned the greeting. Then he asked directly, "Is there any progress in the case of the missing girls?" County Magistrate Lu looked at him and nodded. He said, "There is some progress. We can almost determine where those girls were taken." "That's good." The man showed a hint of joy on his face and said, "Our superiors are pressing us, and the government is also under great pressure. Since you have found it, you should take action immediately and close the case as soon as possible, so as not to cause more trouble." County Magistrate Lu frowned and said, "But this case involves a county magistrate." Lord Han waved his hand and said, "So what? He is a county magistrate. He has committed such a heinous crime, and he can't escape the punishment of the law." He turned around and waved to a runner. "Go to the government and get more people here. Today, I will make sure that none of them can escape." County Magistrate Lu saw this and said no more. It was also a good thing for them to close the case earlier. The two governments took action at the same time. Naturally, the battle formation could be described as mighty. The constables of the government were in front, and the county magistrate followed. They quickly went out of the city gate. Everyone spread out. Don't gather together. Surround the Peng family from all sides. Lord Han said that no one can escape today. After the leader gave the order, everyone immediately dispersed. In a manner somewhere outside the capital, the guards at the entrance stood lazily, chatting with each other. "Say, who do you think went in just now?" To think that the second young master would personally accompany him. "Who knows?" One of them shook his head and said, "But it must be a big shot in the city." "Why do you think these big shots?" "Maybe. Those big shots like this. They've tried all kinds of things. It's inevitable that they want to try something new." "Don't you think so?" the person on the left said, but didn't get an immediate response from the person next to him. When he turned his head, He saw a knife pressed against the person's neck. A look of terror appeared on his face, and he was just about to scream when he felt a cold sensation on his neck. "Don't talk. Lead the way." As the cold voice fell, there were noisy footsteps in the surroundings. The two Yamens had sent out dozens of bailiffs for this serious case. Although the Peng family had many guards and servants, they didn't dare to resist the officials. How could they resist? In a short period of time, everyone was chased into the courtyard. A few bailiffs entered the inner courtyard and kicked open a door. When they saw the injured woman tied up in the room, their faces were filled with anger. "Put her down first," the leader of the bailiffs said. Immediately, two bailiffs walked over, untied the woman, and wrapped her in a blanket. Inside the room, the naked man was so scared that he couldn't even speak properly. He said in a trembling voice, What are you doing?" The bailiffs picked up the whip beside him and whipped him in the face. He said angrily, "Put him on and take him away." At the same time, the sound of doors being kicked open could be heard from every room in the inner courtyard. In the corner, a few bailiffs kicked open the door and rushed in. When they saw the man in the room, they were startled and blurted out, "Young Master Chu, why? It's you again." Chu Ping looked back and threw the burning candle in his hand to the ground. He looked at the door indifferently. The bailiff's expression changed and immediately said, "Quick, close the door." The case of the missing women that had attracted a lot of attention in the capital had finally been solved. After the women were kidnapped, they were forced into prostitution by the Peng family just to satisfy some perverted animal desires. When the Yamen bailiffs found the Peng family, there were still many people in the room who were doing the beastly things. They were caught on the spot and put on black hoods. They were stuffed into carriages and sent to the Yamen. The abused women were immediately sent to the Women's Medical Center for treatment. Watching the carriages leave, one bailiff said indignantly, "We were the ones who worked hard these days." In the end, the credit was taken by the Yamen. "Why? Shut up." Someone beside him tugged at his arm and said, "Are you blind? Those people who were brought out just now are clearly not ordinary people. Do you think our master would be willing to do something like this?" The bailiffs came to his senses. When he walked through a few rooms, he saw a few familiar faces. They were clearly some of the foppish young masters who often appeared in the capital. His master really couldn't afford to offend the powers behind these people. He clenched his fists tightly, but in the end, he could only sigh and say, "Damn it, I still don't feel good." The banquet at the Chu family had already begun. The middle-aged man looked at the empty seat below and said in confusion, "Strange, it's already so late. Why hasn't Ping returned yet?" Grand Tutor Chu said calmly, "There are many things about Sun Zhongxiu that he can learn from. It's fine for him to come back later." The middle-aged man nodded and said, "Pinger has been working much harder than before." Just as he finished speaking, a servant ran in frantically and said in fear, "Master, there's a letter from the capital Yamen. Something big has happened. Something big has happened." The middle-aged man frowned and said, "Just what happened? Tell me slowly." The servant handed over a piece of paper. After the middle-aged man finished reading it, he suddenly stood up from his seat and flipped over his chair. The dining table also shook violently. Soup splattered everywhere and countless chopsticks fell to the ground. His face was pale. He gripped the paper tightly and murmured, "Unfilial son, unfilial son." Grand Tutor Chu slowly stood up and looked at him. He said, "Give me the letter." The middle-aged man held the letter, and a hint of hesitation appeared on his face. "Give me the letter," Grand Tutor Chu repeated. Hearing this, the middle-aged man could only respectfully hand over the letter. Grand Tutor Chu took the letter. At first, his expression was rather calm. However, not long after, his breathing began to quicken and he gripped the letter tightly. His eyes were bloodshot and his beard was trembling incessantly. The middle-aged man hurriedly walked over and gently patted his back. He said hurriedly, Father, calm down, calm down. Don't be angry and harm your health." Bastard! The descendants of the Chu family have been upright for generations. How could we have produced such a bastard? After a sorrowful voice, the middle-aged man cried out anxiously, Father! Someone, quickly go get a doctor." Chapter 884. That bastard. Where is that bastard now? Grand Tutor Chu had already woken up before the doctor arrived and asked in a trembling voice. The servant replied in a trembling voice, The magistrate's office said that they did not reveal young master's identity. They should be sending young master home soon. As soon as he finished speaking, a servant announced that Lord Zhang and Lord Cui had come to visit. In the distance, a few figures walked over. At the very front were two middle-aged men, and behind them was Chu Ping, who was limping over. Lord Grand Tutor. Kneel! Cui Qingming had just opened his mouth when he was shocked by the furious Lord Grand Tutor, and swallowed the words he wanted to say. Plop! Chu Ping was expressionless as he knelt on the bluestone. Bastard! How did our Chu family produce such a bastard like you? Grand Tutor Chu's expression was somewhat ferocious as he raised his walking stick and fiercely struck Chu Ping's shoulder. This old man will beat you to death today so that my Chu family's ancestors won't be humiliated. Chu Ping's body swayed, but he did not dodge. A cold smile appeared on his face as he said, "Then beat me to death. I'm a cripple anyway. It's a stain on the Chu clan's reputation. It's better if I die. Death is the end of all troubles." Grand Tutor Chu was stunned as he looked at the grandson he had raised since he was a child. He found that after only a few months, he actually did not recognize him. He raised his walking stick but did not lower it for a long time. He murmured, "My Chu family has 100 years of good reputation, 100 years of good reputation. 100 years of good reputation." A bitter smile appeared on Chu Ping's face. "Yes, 100 years of good reputation. As long as you beat me to death, the Chu family will still be the Chu family. The Chu family that is praised by everyone will not lose 100 years of good reputation." He stretched his head out and smiled. "Come, grandfather, I'm ready." Grand Tutor Chu looked at him, his body trembling. The walking stick in his hand could not be lowered. "Ping-er!" He put down his walking stick and bent down, using his withered hands to caress Chu Ping's face. His old eyes were filled with tears as he said in a trembling voice, "Ping-er, how did you become like this?" Chu Ping didn't reply. A pained expression appeared on his face, and he closed his eyes. When he opened them again, they were devoid of emotion. He stood up from the ground, and without giving Grand Tutor Chu another glance, he limped back inside. The middle-aged man behind Grand Tutor Chu stepped forward, looked at Sang Shichen, and asked anxiously, "Lord Sang, what is going on?" Sang Shichen shook his head and said, "Today, the magistrate's office received news that many cases of women going missing in recent days were committed by the Peng family of Pingon County." Chapter 885. Li Yi learned from the Princess Royal that the case of the missing women had been solved. He didn't expect that a powerful person could do such a crazy thing. He turned to look at her and asked, "How are those women now?" Emingzu shook her head and said, "They are still recuperating in the medical center. It's not difficult to heal their physical injuries, but it's their hearts." Li Yi thought for a moment and said, "After such a thing happened, they must have a hard time in the future. Instead of being gossiped about, it's better to find a job for them in your place, so that they won't be looked down upon in the future." He had heard about the situation that day. No one expected that the crazy Peng family kidnapped those women just to satisfy some people's perverted desire. The death of the head of the Peng family was not to be regretted. But how could those women who were physically and mentally injured live a normal life in the future? It was a big problem. Emingzu nodded and said, "I know this. What are you going to do with the playboys caught by the Peng family and them?" Li Yi looked at her and asked. According to the law, the head of the Peng family should be beheaded. Several important accomplices will not be able to keep their lives. Although the other people's crimes are relatively light, they cannot avoid being exiled for 1,000 miles. As for those playboys, the lightest punishment will be exile. Li Mingzhu stood up and said, "However, there are still 2 women that we have not found." Li Yi frowned slightly and asked, "Haven't found them?" Emingzu shook her head and said, "The Peng family confessed to the crimes they committed and told the details of the case, but they denied that they had kidnapped the 2 women. The servants of the Peng family have also interrogated them one by one, and then conducted a thorough search of the Peng family, but they also didn't find any clues related to the 2 women." Li Yi was surprised and said, "Could it be that there is someone else involved in the case of the 2 women? I've already sent people to continue the investigation." Emingzu looked at him and thought of another matter and said, "The Ministry of Justice has already handed over the case of the Zhang family. Lord Zhang was indeed wronged, but the main culprit died on the way to exile, so his family couldn't find him or pursue the matter. The court can give some compensation to the Zhang family and Miss Zhang." Li Yi waved his hand and said. Since they're dead, there's no point in pursuing the matter. Compensation. Forget it. But since they were wronged, it's not too much to overturn the case and give justice to the Zheng family, right? Emingzu looked at him and nodded and said, Of course. Li Yi cupped his fists at her. Thanks for the matter with the Zheng family. Li Mingzhu looked at him and asked, This thank you, are you saying it yourself, or on behalf of Miss Zheng? Is there a difference? Chapter 886. The situation in the Wu Kingdom is different from ours. The current emperor of the Wu Kingdom killed his brother and father. He didn't get the throne with a proper reason and didn't win the hearts of the people. He was despised by the scholars in the Wu Kingdom. Although he used force to clean up some of them, the whole Wu Kingdom was in great turmoil. Li Yi looked at Mississippi Lu and said slowly, Today, more than half of the places in the Wu Kingdom are out of the control of the imperial court. Among them, there are forces loyal to the former emperor of the Wu Kingdom, and there are bandits who took advantage of the chaos. In short, the Wu Kingdom is in a mess, very messy. Princess Duanrong, who disappeared mysteriously after the emperor of the Wu Kingdom seized power, returned to the Wu Kingdom a year ago. She gathered a few generals who rebelled against the current imperial court and also gathered a considerable force. They cleaned up the bandits who occupied the mountains and made themselves kings, and at the same time strengthened their force to fight against the imperial court. Li looked into her eyes and said, You don't have to worry too much. There are many people around your apprentice now. Although it's not possible to overthrow the entire imperial court, they can still protect themselves. I see. Mississippi Lu nodded and turned to walk outside. Where are you going? Li Yi asked hurriedly. Although she didn't show anything in the past year, Mississippi Lu only taught her one precious apprentice with all her heart. How could she not care about her? If she were in the Wu Kingdom now, she would have already led the masters of the Lu League to break into the imperial palace and take the head of the emperor of the Wu Kingdom. Mississippi Lu turned around and said, I'll go ask Chief Su what tricks he taught you 2 days ago. Li Yi's expression changed. This was more dangerous than her breaking into the imperial palace. He quickly walked in front of her and changed the topic. Rui, do you remember the Taoist who followed us back from the Qi Kingdom? Of course I remember. Mississippi Lu glanced at him. She had only met a few grandmasters. How could she forget? I heard from Su that the Taoist priest was about the same age as Su, but he looked like he was 2 generations younger than Su. Do you know why? Mississippi Lu pursed her lips and said, That's nothing. Taoist Kung Fu focuses on maintaining one's health. It has a certain effect of prolonging one's life and retaining one's youthfulness. That Taoist must be practicing a top-notch youth-retaining technique. I heard from my father before. As she said this, she seemed to recall something from the past. Her tone paused and her face darkened slightly. He was about the same age as Su, but he looked so young. Li Yi had been eyeing old Taoist Yuan for a long time. His interest was immediately piqued and he hurriedly asked, What? What did our father say? Mississippi. Lu came back to her senses. She glared at him and said, Who's with our father? What you said isn't right. Li Yi looked at her and explained, You and Rui are sisters. Your father is Rui's father. I'm Rui's husband. Rui's father is my father. In this way your father is my father. Besides, we're a family. Mississippi Lu did not argue with him. She waved her hand and interrupted him. My father used to say, Our father. Li Yi corrected her again. In the past, our father said that he had seen a Taoist priest who had cultivated the Taoist technique of retaining one's youth to the extreme. He had already lived for 60 years, but he still had the face of a young man. His appearance would not change until he died. Speaking of this, Mississippi Lu did not care at all. She changed the topic and said, However, although this kung fu can maintain one's appearance, it doesn't help martial arts much. It also needs to buy all kinds of precious medicinal materials. Not to mention the time and effort it takes. The silver alone is not something ordinary people can afford. It's just a useless kung fu. Li Yi said indifferently, We're not ordinary people. It's not a big deal to spend more money. Mississippi Lu frowned and said, The silver is not the point. The point is that it's a waste of time. It's better to use it to learn some practical kung fu. Li Yi shook his head and said, You can't say that. Rui, You're 19 years old this year. It's the most beautiful time of a woman's life. But can you guarantee that you'll still look like this in 10 or 20 years? Let's not talk about other things. In a few years, although you'll keep practicing kung fu and your figure won't change, wrinkles will appear on your face. Your skin will become loose and lose its luster. In a few years, you'll be old and your pearls will turn yellow. Old and pearls turn yellow? Mississippi Lou looked at him. Li Yi could hear the cracking of his knuckles. Pretend I didn't say anything. Li Yi turned his head and walked away. As he walked, he said, "If you think it's useless, then forget it. I'll let Rui practice. I'll let Xiaofan practice too. By then you'll be the only one." Mississippi Lou leaped slightly and appeared in front of Li Yi. She asked calmly, "What if I'm the only one?" Li Yi walked around her and said softly, "Only you can experience the complete life of a woman. As a woman, who wouldn't want to remain young and beautiful forever? However, there was a price to pay for everything. Using a large amount of time to cultivate the Taoist's youthful but useless technique of retaining one's looks would affect one's martial arts path. But if she didn't learn it, her sister and Xiao Huan could keep their looks. After a few years, she would be the only one who would become old and withered. This was naturally something she couldn't tolerate. Mississippi Lou clenched her fists and looked at Li Yi, who was about to slip out of the door. She said in a low voice, "Come back." Mississippi Lou looked at him and asked, "Taoism's kung fu has never been taught to outsiders. Not to mention this kind of top-notch art of retaining youth. That Taoist Yuan is a grandmaster and has a high position in Taoism. Are you sure you can handle him?" Li Yi smiled and looked straight at her. He said, "In this world, there's no one I can't handle." He could even handle a monk, let alone a Taoist. Although those people had no desires and only wanted to cultivate, it didn't mean they didn't care about anything. A few Taoist canons that didn't exist in this world pointed them to a few more paths of cultivation. It was just a useless secret manual. How could Taoist Yuan be reluctant to give it to them? With one more Taoist scripture, he would be able to impart all of his years of experience in practicing this technique. With one more book, he would have a consultant who would be at his beck and call in the future. With one more book. In order to prevent Mississippi Lou from aging so early, Li Yi's hands were sore. "Take it." He tossed 2 booklets to her. One of them recorded the youth-retaining technique, and the other recorded the insights and experiences of old Taoist Yuan and the seniors of their sect when they cultivated this technique. It would allow people to take fewer detours when cultivating. Although Taoist Yuan wouldn't give him a fake one out of respect for the Lord of Tao and virtue, it was necessary to let Rui and second great-uncle examine it first. After watching Mississippi Lou go to Rui's room, he sat down at the stone table in the courtyard. He took out a few pieces of paper from his sleeve and opened them one by one. In the end, the Cui family couldn't sit still. This time, they had to be wary of not only the Cui family, but also the Chu family. Ever since Grand Tutor Chu had returned to the capital, he had spent most of his time in seclusion. But recently, he had frequently visited the famous Confucian scholars near the capital. No one knew what they had talked about, but the scholars and scholars of the capital had frequently gathered and there had been many movements. In the end, the Chu family still made a move. Even though they were already mentally prepared, they still felt a little complicated when it happened. Her Royal Highness was already very famous among the scholars in the world, but if they didn't target the princess, Grand Tutor Chu? Li Yi crumpled all the papers into a ball and sighed softly. Mississippi Lou walked out of the room and looked at him. "Oh yes, there's one more thing. I asked, but Chief Su said he didn't teach you any techniques." "Ah, he didn't?" Li Yi looked surprised. After a while he nodded and said, "Oh, if he didn't, then he didn't. Maybe I remembered wrongly." Chapter 887. In the pavilion in the middle of the lake, Li Yi was cracking melon seeds. Occasionally, he would throw a few melon seeds into the lake to attract a few fish. The proud Lolita, with her sharp eyes and quick hands, caught them with a small net. She then quickly ran to her private courtyard and put them in a transparent fish tank. When only the 2 of them were left in the pavilion, Li Mingzhu stood up from the stone bench and said slowly, "Grand Tutor Chu has been going around these days. He has gathered some influential scholars and encouraged the scholars in the capital and the vicinity of the capital to write a letter to ask Father to recall the king of Shu from Shuzhou, and have him enter the Eastern Palace to preside over the court. What did His Majesty say? Li Yi had already peeled a plate of melon seeds. He picked up the plate and gestured to her. Her Royal Highness took the plate and gathered all the melon seeds that he had spent a long time peeling into her hands. Li Yi secretly swallowed a mouthful of saliva and wondered if he had expressed the wrong intention just now. When he handed the plate to her, he clearly wanted her to pinch a few seeds as a gesture. The princess ate all the melon seeds in a way that made Li Yi envious. Then she said, "Father has not expressed his opinion, but this matter has greatly affected the scholars in the capital. It is not a long-term solution to leave it like this. Moreover, Grand Tutor Chu has already begun to visit some officials in the court. It should be for this matter. Many of those people were his students. After all, they have a righteous cause, and Grand Tutor Chu has personally come forward, I'm afraid." The same method used by the Cui family and Grand Tutor Chu had a completely different effect. After all, the latter was simply the benchmark in the hearts of the scholars of the Jing kingdom. With a casual wave of his hand, countless people would echo him. There were peaches and plums all over the world. To be precise, the old emperor was also one of those peaches and plums. Grand Tutor Chu's influence in the Jing kingdom could no longer be described as 100 people at a single call. If it weren't for the fact that the king of Shu had made such a grave mistake, which could be described as a bastard or a rebellion, he wouldn't even need to make such a big fuss. All he had to do was stand out and make his stand clear. Naturally, countless people would follow him. But then again, Li Yi also felt that the old emperor treated the king of Shu and the Cui family differently from the other princes. It was even somewhat out of line with his usual style of doing things. They had been monarch and minister, or friends for so long, and there was a tacit understanding between the Cui family and the king of Shu. Don't worry. You know His Majesty's temperament. Li Yi smiled and said, what he has decided is not so easy to change. The Tsundra Loli had already released the fish, washed her hands, and ran over. As soon as she entered the pavilion, she asked Li Yi, "Sir, where are the melon seeds you peeled for me? I want to eat them all at once." Then she saw the empty plate on the table. "Sir." She pouted and looked at Li Yi with an aggrieved expression. Li Yi looked at Emingzu, and the proud Lolita followed his gaze to look at Emingzu. Emingzu stared blankly at Li Yi, and the proud Lolita's gaze shifted to him again. "Sir." Li Yi helplessly pinched her face and said, Okay. I'll peel more for you right away." On a grassy slope across the lake, a figure crawling there finally put down the binoculars in his hands. Something's wrong indeed." Li Xian hung the binoculars around his neck and slid down the slope. Through many long-distance observations, he could already confirm that Emingzu and Li Yi did not have the kind of relationship that he had always thought. They were using this relationship to cover up something that they did not want him to know. What was it that made Emingzu willing to put down her reputation? The fire of curiosity in his heart burned even more intensely. On the way back to the Academy of Sciences, he ordered a guard behind him. "Bring me the person from yesterday." The guard responded. Not long after, a skinny old man was brought in. After walking into the room, the old man immediately bowed respectfully. "This commoner greets your highness. Dispense with the formalities." Li Xian waved his hand and looked at him. He asked suspiciously, "You said that you can guess what other people are saying by looking at their lips?" The old man immediately said, "Your highness, this commoner has studied lip reading for decades. Although I can't say that I can guess everything correctly, I can roughly guess it." "Teach me." Li Xian looked at him and said, "Didn't you want to pass down your unique skill?" "I'll leave a place for you in the Academy of Sciences." The old man was stunned. He immediately knelt on the ground and said repeatedly, "Thank you, your highness. Thank you, your highness." The Chu family. The middle-aged man helped the violently coughing Grand Tutor Chu back to his room. After a moment of hesitation he said, "Father, why don't you not go out for the next 2 days? You've just recovered from your cold. The doctor said that you should rest well at home. Since it's already begun, it can't be stopped." Grand Tutor Chu covered his mouth and coughed. "How has Pinger been these days?" The middle-aged man sighed. "He locks himself in his room every day and doesn't say a word. But this makes me even more worried." Grand Tutor Chu turned to look in a certain direction and murmured, "It's my fault. I've restrained him too much in the past. Everyone, let's not be restrained today. We won't go home until we're drunk." At the Cui family banquet, Cui Qingming faced the crowd and laughed. The Qin family's fifth master paused, then said, "Moreover, I'm not in the court, so I really can't see clearly." Qin Xiang raised his head to look at the dark clouds covering the night sky, where not a single star could be seen. He sighed and muttered, "The sky is about to change. I just can't see clearly." The proud Lolita who had recently come to their house to freeload frequently looked at her dazed husband and reminded him, "Sir, the meat in the pot is cooked." Li Yi came back to his senses. Looking at the slightly curled-up lamb meat in the pot, he shook his head and said, "There's no rush. Let's wait for it to float up." Chapter 888. Led by Grand Tutor Chu, several famous scholars in the capital are no longer just asking for the King of Shu to return and take charge of the Eastern Palace. In the past 2 days, there have been rumors among the officials they influence that you are the sycophant who obstructed the peace talks between the Qi and Jing kingdoms, stirring up a foul atmosphere in the court. Li Yi didn't continue her words. Instead, he asked, "Tomorrow is the 13th. How are the preparations going?" Emingzu nodded and said, "Father has already personally issued the edict. It can be announced at any time. You can arrange the time yourself." Then she frowned and looked at him. "If you really had any ideas, you should have told me in advance. Their target this time is you. Don't always look so indifferent." "It doesn't matter if I didn't," Li Yi said somewhat helplessly. "The Chu family has been caught red-handed, so we have no choice but to work hard. In terms of influence in the imperial court, all of us combined are no match for that Grand Tutor. If they want to talk, let them talk. We can't shut their mouths." Emingzu was startled. She asked in confusion, "What blackmailed the Chu family?" "The Chu family." Li Yi had just opened his mouth when he suddenly looked at Li Xian, who was standing to the side. He asked, "Is there something on my face?" "No." Li Xian shook his head without hesitation. "Then why do you keep looking at me?" Li Xian shrugged. "Other than you and Emingzu, there are only the two of you here. If I don't look at you, am I supposed to look at myself?" It was one thing to look, but to look for an hour and mumble while looking was quite abnormal. He glanced at Li Xian and said to Emingzu, "Let's go over there and talk." On the bustling streets of the capital, the goddess of Luo Shui tilted her head and looked at Li Yi. She asked in confusion, "Where are we going?" Li Yi said casually, "We have nothing to do anyway. Let's just walk around." Zheng Zumo looked at him and asked, "Do you remember what day it is today?" Li Yi was puzzled. "April 13th, what's wrong?" "It's nothing." She shook her head and looked ahead. She pointed and said, "There's a new jewelry shop over there. Let's go take a look." The goddess of Luo Shui wasn't in a good mood today. Along the way, she didn't buy anything. She lowered her head and was lost in her thoughts. Only when the two of them were far away from the bustling city, and there were fewer and fewer people around them, did she finally come back to her senses. She looked around and looked at Li Yi. She asked doubtfully, "Why did we walk here?" Li Yi raised his head and looked at the plaque above the gate, which read, "Zhang Residence." He held her hand and smiled. "Let's go in." Zheng Zumo's body almost subconsciously paused. This used to be the place she was most familiar with, but also the place she was most unfamiliar with. It had carried her sweetest and happiest memories and was also the beginning of the longest nightmare she had ever had. She held Li Yi's hand tightly and looked back at him. Their eyes met for a moment. Then she turned back and let out a long sigh. She nodded and said, "Let's go." The two of them stepped on the stone steps. Li Yi pushed the door open. The heavy wooden door made a creaking sound, revealing a dozen figures behind the door. "Uncle Ho." Zheng Zumo looked at the old man who was bowing at the front. After a moment of daze, she looked back with surprise on her face. "Uncle Qi, Nanny Hua, Xiao Mei, you are Xiao Mei. How did you, Miss?" The dozen people all bowed. The old man at the front raised his head and said with a smile, "Miss, welcome home." Her mind was blank. Holding Li Yi's hand, she was led into the Zhang residence by him. Only then did she realize that this place was completely different from the last 2 times she had been here. More than a decade ago, when she was still in the Zhang residence, there should be a stone pavilion on the left side of the garden. Whenever it rained, she didn't want to stay in the stuffy room. She would sit in the stone pavilion, watching the mist in the sky and listening to the pitter-patter of rain. She didn't see the stone pavilion the last 2 times she came to the Zhang residence. It must have been torn down. This time, it miraculously appeared in front of her eyes. Whether it was in the position or the direction it was facing, it was exactly the same as she remembered. The previous 2 times she saw a few small houses that didn't exist for more than a decade. They must have been built in recent years. This time, they disappeared as well, and an empty space under the wall reappeared. A long time ago, when the weather was fine, she would play shuttlecock with the maids in the Zhang residence. In the entire Zhang residence, she was the only one who could play shuttlecock without hitting the ground after 100 times. The decoration in the front hall was also very different from the last time. Tables, chairs, screens. These things began to overlap with the Zhang residence in her memory. This was the Zhang residence, the only Zhang residence in her heart. She looked at Li Yi and wanted to ask him something. However, Li Yi had already pulled her into his arms and whispered in her ear, "This is your birthday present. Do you like it?" Only then did she realize what he meant when he asked her, "Do you like it here?" The last time they came to the Zhang family's house, he asked her, "Do you like it here?" She didn't know how he got the Zhang residence from those people. She only knew that this was his birthday present for her, and that was enough. The imperial edict has arrived. A sharp and piercing voice suddenly rang out from outside. She hurriedly escaped from Li Yi's embrace and saw 2 fair-skinned, beardless men walking in. Chapter 889. Zhang Shichen hurriedly picked up a box from the ground and put it on the table. "This is the contract of Steward Ho and the others. From now on, let them stay here." The blush on Zhang Zimo's face hadn't disappeared. She lowered her head and didn't dare to look at anyone. "Thank you, second uncle." Hearing this title again after so many years, Zhang Shichen couldn't hide the joy on his face. He also let out a long sigh of relief. She was willing to call him second uncle, which meant that she had let go of the knot in her heart from 13 years ago. This was also the knot in his heart that he couldn't let go of for a long time. "Then, I'll leave first." Zhang Shichen looked at them, especially at Li Yi's face, for a long time. He then turned around and left, closing the door on his way out. The Luo Shui goddess still had her head down. Li Yi sat on the chair and pulled her over. "He's gone, let's continue." "Continue what?" The Luo Shui goddess's voice was almost inaudible. Li Yi didn't answer. Instead, he used his actions to tell her what to continue. After an unknown amount of time, she lazily leaned against Li Yi's chest. Her eyes were blurred as she murmured, "Do you still remember what it was like when we first met?" Li Yi grabbed her hand and said, "At that time, I also grabbed your hand like this, and you still thought I was a lecher." "You are a lecher." Zhang Zimo removed her hand from his waist and said with a blush, "So be it. It's good to be a lecher." Li Yi put his hand back and said shamelessly. She symbolically struggled for a while before letting him be. She murmured, "I still remember that time in the Jadeite courtyard. You rushed up from below the stage and asked me if I had transmigrated from Earth. From then on I was curious. What is Earth and what is transmigration?" Now that Li Yi thought about it, he found it a little funny. Not long after he came to this world, he happened to hear someone singing Immortal Magpie Bridge, which only existed in another world. Naturally, he was surprised and happy, but in the end, it was just a misunderstanding. However, if not for that beautiful misunderstanding, there would be no such scene. He couldn't help hugging her tightly and said with a smile, "It's a secret." She grew up here and naturally had an unforgettable feeling for this place. When the two walked out of the room, Li Yi had already discussed with her. They would go back to Willow Lane to tidy up and move here with Wan and Ruoqing in a few days. She had never dared to do something like that before. Moreover, she did it in front of these people whom she had known since she was young. Therefore, after she walked out of the room, she blushed and lowered her head. Especially when she saw Zhang Shichen standing in front of her. Even her white and tender neck was covered with a layer of pink. This time, the Cui family's target is not only the king of Shu, but also you. Zhang Shichen glared at him vaguely before saying, "It may not be peaceful in the near future. Be careful." Zhang Zimo looked at Li Yi worriedly and asked, "Are they going to do something bad to you?" Li Yi helped her tidy up her slightly messy hair and said, "Don't worry. Who do you think your husband is?" The Chui family is more than 1,000 years too early to make trouble for me. Now is not the time. No matter what happens, it's best to wait and see. Zhang Shichen looked at him and said, the Chu family's influence is too wide. If you can't kill them in one strike, there will be endless trouble. Now is not the time for you to act. Zhang Shichen said it was not the right time. Li Yi could naturally understand. For example, Grand Tutor Chu's precious grandson had some strange hobbies and was related to the missing girl some time ago. But because he was the grandson of the Chu family, he was secretly let go. If this matter was revealed at a normal time, it would at most affect the Chu family's reputation a little. With Grand Tutor Chu around, the Chu family could still stand tall. However, if he was the happiest person in the Chu clan and used the clan's accumulated reputation to do something, it would be like a sharp blade that could destroy the foundation of the clan. Moreover, if they didn't drag things out, who knew who else would jump out at the crucial moment in court? In a pavilion in the middle of the lake, Li Yi was teaching Yongning how to fish. She had almost completely integrated into this world. After all, she was still young and her worldview had not formed. When she grew older, she probably wouldn't have a clear impression of the other world. How can you still sit here? Li Xian walked over from behind and said with a frown, news just came from the palace. The court is almost in an uproar. Even Uncle Huang was alarmed and went straight to the Great Hall. You're actually fishing here? Then what can I do? Li Yi glanced at him and said, fight with those old scholars? Won't they have another reason to impeach me? The matter of your impeachment has already been suppressed by Emingzu. Li Xian shook his head and said, in court, led by Grand Tutor Chu and accompanied by 4 scholars, those people are jointly asking Uncle Huang to issue an edict to transfer the king of Shu back to the capital. Li Yi held Yongning's small hand and helped her stabilize the fishing rod. He then gently pulled it up and a fat carp jumped out of the water. The little girl let go of the fishing rod and shook Li Yi's arm. She said excitedly, brother, a fish has taken the bait. Li Yi patted her head and said with a smile, this fish, I'll make fish soup for Yongning later. In the Great Hall. His Majesty had just lost his temper. The atmosphere in the Great Hall was heavy and deathly silent. Grand Tutor Chu looked up and got up from his chair. Leaning on his walking stick, he moved step by step to the center of the Great Hall. His Majesty's body is unwell. It's best to appoint a crown prince as soon as possible to establish the foundation of the country and settle the hearts of the people. The king of Shu is the son of concubine Cui and is also His Majesty's eldest son. He has a respected status and is in line with the ancestral rules. He is the best candidate to live in the East Palace. He covered his mouth and coughed a few times. He put down his walking stick, cupped his fists and bowed. He said loudly, Your Majesty, please summon the king of Shu back to the capital. Among the hundreds of officials, 4 white-haired old men walked out and stood behind Grand Tutor Chu. They bowed deeply and said loudly, Your Majesty, please summon the king of Shu back to the capital. In the Great Hall, many officials looked at each other and walked out. Your Majesty, please summon the king of Shu back to the capital. Your Majesty, please summon the king of Shu back to the capital. Your Majesty, please summon the king of Shu back to the capital. Everyone's voices resounded throughout the hall. Even though there were a few different voices, they were quickly drowned out. Cui Qingming was also in the crowd with a smile on his face. They don't look like courtiers at all. In front of the crowd, Prime Minister Shin's face darkened. He said angrily, What are they doing? They are forcing the emperor to abdicate. Seeing this, Qin Xiang shook his head with a complicated expression. Emperor Jing slowly rose from his throne and looked down. His gaze finally stopped on Grand Tutor Chu's face. His chest rose and fell slightly as he slowly said, Grand Tutor, are you forcing us? I dare not force your Majesty. Grand Tutor Chu lifted his head, his gaze calm. I'm doing this for the world, for the people of the Jing Kingdom and for His Majesty. He tidied up his robe, knelt on the ground and said loudly, Your Majesty, please issue the decree. Your Majesty, please issue the decree. Your Majesty, please issue the decree. The sound waves grew louder and louder, as if they were going to overturn the roof of the Great Hall. Emperor Jing revealed a sorrowful expression. He pointed downwards and murmured, You Hall. Changde immediately stepped forward and said anxiously, Your Majesty, the dragon's body is more important. Emingzu quickly walked over from the side and said, Bring Imperial Father to rest first. After a few eunuchs accompanied Emperor Jing and left, she walked down the steps and looked at Grand Tutor Chu and asked, "Grand Tutor, how long are you going to kneel for?" Grand Tutor Chu raised his head and said expressionlessly, "As long as His Majesty does not issue the decree, this old man will not get up." Chapter 890. Li Yi and Li Xian were waiting outside the hall. When an imperial physician came out, Li Xian quickly walked over and asked anxiously, "How is Uncle Huang?" The imperial physician sighed and shook his head. Li Xian's expression changed. He grabbed his collar and asked, "Is it serious?" "Why do you say that, Your Highness?" The imperial physician was surprised and said, "His Majesty was just temporarily stimulated. His mood was too unstable, causing his condition to relapse." Li Xian relaxed and glared at him. "Then why did you shake your head just now?" "My neck was a little stiff just now, so I moved it a little." The imperial physician sighed and then said, "However, you still have to pay more attention in the future. His Majesty's condition really can't take any more stimulation." "Get out, get out, get out." Li Xian kicked the imperial physician's buttocks and waved his hand impatiently. After the eunuch reported, the two entered the hall. Emperor Jing was lying on a soft couch inside and waved at them from a distance. Li Xian quickly walked over and said, "Uncle Huang, the dragon's health is more important. You can let Mingzu handle these matters of the court. If they want to kneel, let them kneel until they die in the hall. It will save us some trouble." "What a stupid thing to say." Prince Ning glared at him and said, "If the current Grand Tutor of the court kneels until he dies in the Golden Hall, how will the world talk about His Majesty?" "I don't mind." Emperor Jing shook his head and looked at Li Yi. He said, "You have been wronged. What you have done is beneficial to the country and the people. It is a good deed that will last for generations, but you are regarded as a sycophant." Li Yi looked at Emperor Jing's pale face and said, "Whether it is a good deed or a bad deed, the future generations will judge. Moreover, the people are not stupid. They can't be toyed with as they like. I believe that the world will naturally give me justice." Seeing the fatigue on his face, Li Xian stood up and said, "Uncle Huang, please rest well. We won't disturb you any longer." After leaving the hall, the smile on Li Xian's face immediately disappeared. He said angrily, "Are these old fellows trying to force me to abdicate and rebel?" Li Yi patted him on the shoulder and said, "You just can't stay calm when something happens. Don't worry, let's go and take a look first." In the main hall, Emperor Jing covered his chest and coughed a few times before slowly saying, "I can feel that I don't have much time left." Pain appeared in King Ning's eyes. "Imperial brother?" Emperor Jing looked out of the hole. After a long time he said, "At first, I also thought that you should take this position." Without waiting for him to finish, Prince Ning immediately bowed. "Imperial brother, you must not do this. We know that you don't want to be trapped in this position. Otherwise, the one lying here right now would be you." At the very least, he had hidden the fact that he wanted to make Princess Royal Empress from the old emperor. If one were to really think about it, compared to this treasonous matter, what the Cui family did was nothing. Rui wasn't surprised by his words. After some thought she said solemnly, "If hubby is a sycophant, then I'm the wife of the sycophant. When the sycophant and his wife join forces, there's no one to be afraid of." Li Yi grabbed her hand and said with a smile, "Don't worry. One sycophant is enough to deal with these people. The sycophant's son is crying again. It's best you coax the sycophant's wife." Rui went to coax the restless Li Duan. Mississippi Lu walked over from behind and stood in front of him. She looked down at him and asked, "How much longer are you going to wait?" Lying on the recliner to look at Mississippi Lu, he felt like he was looking up at her. Li Yi shook his head and said, "Those are all great Confucian scholars. In terms of influence, I can't compare to them. I have an idea. Rui, why don't you visit those stubborn old fogies one by one at night? You don't have to beat them to death. All you have to do is beat them until they are paralyzed and unable to take care of themselves. That way they won't be able to run around stirring up trouble." "All right." Mississippi Lu simply agreed. The next moment, she disappeared in front of Li Yi. Suddenly losing sight of Mississippi Lu, Li Yi was startled. He immediately jumped up from the rocking chair and chased after her. He shouted, "Wait a minute. Let's discuss it again. Maybe there's another way." He didn't catch up with Mississippi Lu. Instead, he saw Li Xian and the eldest princess who came together. When the three of them walked back in, someone also came out from another high door. A middle-aged man said apologetically, "Prime Minister Qin, I'm really sorry. My father hasn't been feeling well recently and is resting in bed. He won't see anyone." Prime Minister Qin looked at the two carriages parked in front of the Chu residence. He didn't say anything. He just looked at the middle-aged man and said lightly, "I have something to say. Tell the Grand Tutor that Qin Wen is grateful for his teaching back then. But today, he wants to destroy the pillar of the Jing kingdom. I beg to differ." Inside the hall, Li Yi had just asked Li Xian and the eldest princess to sit down. Before the tea was served, Feng walked in from outside and said, "Marquis, Lord Sang is here." "Sang Shichen should be here soon." Li Yi nodded and said, "Invite him in." Sang Shichen was wearing casual clothes today. When he walked into the hall, he looked up and was stunned at first. Then he immediately bowed and said, "Sang Shichen greets the princess and the crown prince." In addition, that woman's older sister felt that there was something fishy about the case and went to the capital governor's yamen to seek justice. To this day, she is still imprisoned in the yamen. Li Xian was startled. Confusion and shock appeared on his face. He pointed at him and said, "You, aren't you Sang Shichen?" Sang Shichen straightened his clothes and knelt down in the direction of the eldest princess. In a loud voice he said, "I have sinned." "You." Li Xian pointed at him and was so shocked that he couldn't say anything. In the end he could only choke out, "You traitor, you betrayed me well. So that's why you locked that woman up." Li Yi stood up as well. He looked at him and asked, "Why didn't you tell me about this before?" Sang Shichen raised his head and slowly said, "The time has not come." Emingzu gazed at him and asked, "Do you know what the crime is?" Sang Shichen lowered his head and said, "No matter what the crime is, it's still much better than following the Cui family down a dead end." Emingzu looked at him and waved her hand. "Stand up and talk." After listening to Sang Shichen's words, Her Highness shook her head and said, "No wonder. No wonder he was so radical." Grand Tutor Chu had no other way to protect the Chu family's reputation. Li Xian slammed the table and said angrily, "The Cui family actually used such despicable methods. Why didn't they tell old Chu about this?" Sang Shichen shook his head and said, "The Chu family can no longer turn back. Whether it was the Cui family's scheme or not, the case was committed by Chu Ping. The Cui family has been uninvolved from the beginning. It's impossible to topple such a powerful family with just one side of the story. Moreover, the capital is deep. The Cui family is not as simple as the crown prince appears to be." Qin He. A trace of doubt appeared on Li Yi's face. His lips moved slightly before he looked at Sang Shichen and asked, "How is the victim's sister now?" Sang Shichen said, "In order to prevent the Cui family from silencing her, I have kept her in prison. But this time, if she is released, she can no longer sound the grievance drum of the capital yamen. Young master, Lu Yizhong from the Ministry of Justice is here." Feng came in from outside, feeling puzzled. What was going on today? It wasn't a holiday, but everyone was running home. Sang Shichen looked back and said, "I'll go back first. If anything happens, I'll get someone to contact you." Li Yi nodded and waved at Feng. He said, "Send Lord Sang out through the back door." Lord Li. After Lu Yizhong entered, he first bowed to Li Yi. Just as he was about to speak, a voice rang in his ear. "Do you only have eyes for Lord Li?" Lu Yizhong was startled. When he saw the two people behind Li Yi, he immediately bowed and said, "Greetings, Your Highness, Crown Prince." When he looked up again, his mouth opened, but he didn't know if he should speak. Li Yi waved his hand and said, "It's fine." The princess and crown prince are on the same side. "Tell me, how's the investigation of the case?" Lu Yizhong nodded and said, "The two missing women have been confirmed to have nothing to do with the Peng family. In the process of investigating the case, I unexpectedly found that the number of missing women in the capital region in the past 2 years has far exceeded the previous years. But the places where they went missing before were relatively scattered. involving more than a dozen counties. The number of missing people in each county is not large, but if you add them up, it is an extremely terrifying number. Li Yi frowned slightly. There are so many people, but there's no clue at all? Lu Yizhong shook his head and said, all the clues were inexplicably cut off after extending to the capital. Until now, there has been no useful discovery, and there is no direct evidence that these are related to the Cui family. Li Xian looked at him in surprise and asked, you suspect that the Cui family is also involved in the business of abducting women and selling women? I don't know. Li Yi shook his head and said, whether or not it has anything to do with the Cui family, we should always try our best to find the two missing women. Otherwise, this case will not be over. He turned his head to look at Lu Yizhong and said, you continue to follow up on this case. Then this subordinate will go back first. Lu Yizhong nodded. After a few steps, a trace of hesitation appeared on his face. He then turned his head and said, my lord, you can deal with those rotten scholars with all your strength. There is no need to pay attention to the Cui family. Li Xian looked at Lu Yizhong's back as he left, then turned his head and said, why do I feel that there is a hidden meaning in his words? Li Yi looked at him in surprise. You can hear the hidden meaning in his words? Without waiting for Li Xian to reply, Feng walked in with a surprised expression. He looked at Li Yi and said, young master, someone has come again. It is the old man called Prime Minister Qin who came last time. Li Xian and Emingzu looked at each other. The regent eldest princess was together with the country's trader, which was rumored to be the talk of the outside world. It was not good for the prime minister to see it. Emingzu looked at him and walked behind a screen with Li Xian. The white-haired old man stepped into the hall and said, young people are indeed fearless. The outside world is like a tide of rumors, yet you are still able to sit still. Li Yi stood up and cupped his hands. Prime Minister Qin, please sit. All right, I won't be sitting. I've only come here today to bring a message to you. Prime Minister Qin stood at the door and looked at him calmly. He said, stick to what you think is right. There are still many discerning people in the court. Chapter 893. County Magistrate Lu must have had a hard time these days. He must have been under a lot of pressure from all sides. Have a seat, Lord Lu. After he walked into the hall, Li Yi stretched out his hand and turned to Feng. Go make a cup of tea for Lord Lu. County Magistrate Lu sat down uneasily. Seeing the teacups on the table, he was slightly stunned. There were some guests just now. Emingzu and Li Xian didn't come out from behind the screen, and Li Yi didn't explain too much. He looked at County Magistrate Lu and said, Lord Lu, I've troubled you these days. Lord Li, please don't say that. County Magistrate Lu hurriedly stood up and cupped his hands, saying, without Lord Li, there would be no me Lu Dayo today. I can still distinguish some things. Li Yi smiled and asked, Lord Lu, did you encounter some difficulties today? Could it be that someone from above is pressuring you? County Magistrate Lu smiled carelessly and said, I'm the magistrate of the capital city, the magistrate of His Majesty and the common people. Other people and other things have nothing to do with me. He looked at Li Yi and asked, I wonder if Lord Li still remembers this lowly official's friend? Li Yi was stunned. He thought for a moment and asked, Lord Lu, are you talking about the friend of the single-eyelid parents? Lu Dayo nodded and said, yes. Obviously, old Lu hadn't completely let go of this matter. Li Yi picked up the teacup and took a sip, indicating him to continue. He looked solemn and asked, Lord Li, I'll ask you again, is it really impossible for parents with single eyelid to give birth to children with double eyelid? Li Yi shook his head and said, I know it may be hard for Lord Lu to accept this matter, but this is indeed the law of nature, which has almost never changed since ancient times. County Magistrate Lu looked at Li Yi with hesitation on his face again. Finally, he made up his mind and said, to be honest, the person I'm talking about is not my friend. He had used this trick countless times, but he never thought that the person was a friend of County Magistrate Lu. Li Yi put down the teacup side and said, in fact, I have known it for a long time. This time, it was County Magistrate Lu's turn to be shocked. He looked at Li Yi and asked in disbelief, Lord Li, you also know that the King of Shu is not His Majesty's biological son? He finally breathed a sigh of relief in his heart. If Lord Li had failed in the confrontation with the Cui family, his fate would not have been any better. Losing his official hat would have been a light punishment, and he might even have been killed. However, this matter was too important, and his life could be in danger at every turn. If it wasn't for his trust in Lord Li, unless it was a matter of life and death, he would definitely bury this secret in his heart forever. Unexpectedly, Lord Li had already known about this matter. What did you say?